So we're welcoming to the show today Shannon Mayer. Welcome, Shannon.
Hey, thank you for having me.
It's great to have you on the show. And I first met Shannon about 7-8 months ago.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Shannon lives in the same area of the world as I do on the west coast of Canada. And when I first met Shannon, something blew me away big time in that she'd spent most of her life up until becoming an author changing horseshoes, right? And
That's correct. Farrier. I was a farrier.
Farrier. And today Shannon is sitting here as a USA Times best-selling author. She's published between 35 and 40 books. And I love the fact that it's somewhere around that amount because she's written so many now she can't remember the exact number. And has recently signed a deal with Amazon Publishing, amongst other things. So Shannon, tell us a bit about your story to date, because obviously I think changing all those horseshoes has brought you some serious good luck.
Well, I started out as a lot of girls, just loving horses, and fell into horseshoeing. But I had always loved reading and always had enjoyed writing, but had been told by, very well-meaning people in my family and friends that, you didn't make money or a living writing books. That was something you did as a hobby or something, the only people who made money at it was, Stephen King or Anne Rice, the big names. And so I never took it seriously until I was a few years into my horseshoeing, and my husband and I were discussing families and having children and how very difficult it would be to be 9 months pregnant and trying to crawl underneath a horse and change horseshoes. So, we discussed possible options in terms of another form of income. Being a typical family, we couldn't survive on a single income. So he really encouraged me. He said, you've always loved writing, so why not try? Because he said the worst thing that's going to happen is you don't make any money at it, but the possibility is there that you could have, a small source of income that would cover what you are already making. So that was a few years ago. I was 25, and I started then to write with the thought that I'm going to try and get something published and get my toes into that industry. So probably without his encouragement, I might not have ever taken that step. So really I owe a huge shout out to him for that, because, a lot of authors don't ever take that step because it's too fearful. It's too fearful to put yourself out there without someone that you really trust backing you. And then I spent a lot of time in the traditional world trying to get agents. I've had a couple of agents and I've fired them both for various reasons. I've had lots of interest recently from the traditional world, but it's because they've seen my success. And so I can be a little pickier now. But yeah, I spent a lot of time learning about the industry and learning about agents and publishing houses and editors and the process and writing pitches and queries and this sort of thing. And it was all a really great education. And long story short, it's been about 3.5 years now that I've been writing full time, and it's been a really fantastic journey. Hard, and definitely has its ups and downs, but I wouldn't trade it for anything.
I mean, I think one of the things that amazes me about you, Shannon, is just the work ethic you've got. And I joke about horseshoes and good luck, but the harder you work, the luckier you get.
Absolutely,
right?
Absolutely.
And I think.
Shannon, can I just sorry to interrupt, Mark. Can I just ask, because you'd done some writing as a child, you'd been put off by people who kind of felt it was another world, a world away, only Stephen King makes money from it, that kind of thing. And then years later, encouraged by your husband, you decide to write. Had you done any writing in between? Was there something that made you think, actually, I can still do this, or was it the first time you sort of picked up a pen in anger in years?
No, I'd spent my quiet time when I was, had a little, hour here or there to myself. I was always writing down ideas. So I would think, this is a great idea. And I would start, and I'd have probably, like a lot of authors and writers out there, I had probably 10 or 15 books that I'd started, 2 or 3 chapters of each, right. Just running off of kind of inspiration I had in that moment. But I'd never gone forward with it and completed any of them. I think the most I'd have done is maybe 35, 40,000 words of a single book. And then another idea would crop up. And because I didn't have a goal specifically to publish, an idea would crop up that caught my attention, and I'd wander off to that. And I think it's a common issue with writers, is that we have all these creative juices flowing, that as we get into a story and a new idea crops up, then we wander off, like I say, and this, it's a good thing and a bad thing, right?
Sure. I mean, it's fascinating because you said you didn't have a goal, but suddenly necessity comes along. You need to earn some money. You can't carry on with the farrier business, so you suddenly have to set a goal.
I've done a couple of boot camps and lessons with my local writers group, and I describe it as having a push and a pull. So with an author, if there's not a push away from something negative, and in my case, the negative was shoeing horses for the rest of my life, as much as I love the animals and my clients, is a crippling career. Like, I've met farriers in their early 40s who have enormous back issues, blown out elbows, crunched up knees and hips because of the damage of doing a very physically demanding job. So that was my push, towards something else. And the pull for me was having a child. And for a woman, that's an incredibly powerful pull. And for me, that was my goal. My goal actually wasn't the financial end of things. It was, I want to have a child. I cannot do that if I stay shoeing horses. So I have to make this work. There was no other option for me.
Right. Yeah.
And what was...
And when you were writing, when you were going to boot camps and stuff like that, were you showing people your writing, the unfinished books, the first chapters? Were you handing that out to people? Was anyone else reading that?
So the boot camps that I actually was running the boot camps, and so I was teaching those lessons. But in terms of my own training, what I did was I started attending conferences, writers' conferences, where I could learn from the masters, as it were, different authors who were already published and successful, and taking various courses. I took a couple of university grade editing classes that ran over 6 to 8 weeks, depending on the specific one. And so I learned the back end of things too. Understanding why people edit the way they edit actually helped me become a stronger writer, because I could avoid the mistakes that a lot of writers make that the editors then have to fix. So I just basically looked for anything that I could do to improve my craft and improve my understanding of the industry and improve my ability to potentially market down the line. Because even though at the beginning, of course, I didn't have anything to market yet, I knew that there would come a point where I would have to do that.
And I think as well, one of the things that that's worth mentioning as well is that when I first met Shannon, I think it was the beginning of the year and you had just finished a year of writing. And unlike a lot of authors I know, including myself, who was you like 15 years ago, written a lot of books, never finished one. What I was amazed at is you'd written and published, is that right, around 12 novels and a couple of novellas in a 12-month period.
Yeah, I think it was, I don't want to overestimate it. I think it was 10. I think it was 10.
Only 10.
10 books. 10 books and a couple of novellas, yeah.
Oh, wow. You see, this is the other thing that I find really fascinating, is that when we, the changes in the industry right now are obviously affecting everyone. And you've really struck on a way of writing and writing prolifically. In fact, Shannon and I, Mark, we did a writing retreat together recently with a group of us. And when I first saw Shannon's Mac laptop, I thought it was like some specially designed author laptop because it didn't have any letters on the keys. And then I suddenly realized when I saw Shannon typing, it was like ninja at work. It was like steam coming off her fingers. So what would you say, Shannon, are some of the keys to your success? I mean, you've actually coming close to selling as an indie author 1.5 million books, which is absolutely incredible. Mm-hmm. And really, there are probably some things that you could attribute to that, partly to that success. What would you say they would be?
So one of the first things I learned was that you write what you love. So I write in the urban fantasy genre, which, for people who aren't familiar with it, I would say it's kind of like Harry Potter for grown-ups. And it's not a huge market. So you have to look at it as a niche market. So I wrote in it, even though I knew that I would never have 100 million or 200 million readers to pull from. But in doing that, in writing what I love, that I feel like that comes through what I'm putting on paper. And so the readers that I do have are incredibly loyal, and they come back time and time and time again. You know, if I write a series that has 20 books in it, they follow through the entire series. So that would be the first thing I would say, is to write what you love. Don't try and write to market. You know, when 50 Shades of Grey came out, I mean, it was this phenomenal worldwide hit for a variety of reasons. And very quickly, the books followed that were exactly the same. And for a while, they did okay. But a lot of those authors now have no following because they wrote to a market that had a limited run to it. And that can be really hard for an author to have that kind of high peak of selling, 100,000 copies a month. And then a year later, they're not even selling 5,000 copies a month because they don't know what to write. They wrote to market. What else do I write? So write what you love. And your readers will show up. They may not show up in droves, but they will show up and they will be loyal to you because they will love what you're writing. The other thing is to, I would say, develop a work ethic that this is not just a hobby. Unfortunately, because as my experience has been, a lot of people will say, oh, writing's a hobby. It's something you do when you have time or when you're bored. I've heard that before. I just write when I'm bored. Really? That's fantastic. Inspiring.